Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest Halcyon Podcast. This is not a PWT, otherwise I would be beginning by addressing myself as your PWT World Heavyweight Championship title holder of the world. And I am still reigning, undefeated, undisputed, and the inaugural champion. No one can touch me, no one can beat me, no one can even try, no one ever will, or ever has successfully pried this title away from me. That would be if it was a PWT podcast. This isn't a PWT podcast. This is an unusual one. Basically, last couple of weeks I've been trying to come up with more ideas for shows, and as a result of a lack of any real progress in that area, I decided to watch some films, watch some TV, watch a little bit of YouTube, try and get the old cogs moving. A recurring theme kept on popping up in my YouTube list, which is that a lot of films these days are being pirated onto YouTube, or at least in segments. Give you little slivets of what made the film great. And a number of them keep coming back with gangster-related films. Things like Goodfellas, things like Casino, a little bit of Lock, Stock, some Snatch, etc., etc. And it got me to wondering, why are these films popular? They are, back in the 90s, early 2000s, maybe even back to the 80s and 70s, gangster films were tremendously popular endeavours into film, and even now with TV series we're seeing things like with The Sopranos, and to a lesser extent with Breaking Bad and things of that nature, where the villains are effectively the ones we're supposed to be rooting for throughout the course of the film. There's something to be said about that, because I think in most everyday lives, if you were to come across a serial killer, a murderer, a woman beater, or a drug dealer, we would be very quick to impose our moral disgust upon that person. In films, though, we find ourselves not only not admonishing that behaviour, but also to a certain extent enjoying it and living vicariously through it. And I wanted to talk about that on a podcast rather than on a review-style show, or indeed any other kind of format, just because it's a little bit looser, it's a bit easier to talk about ideas. I've made a few notes here because I am a prepared boy. So on this podcast, I want to talk about how on the face of it, our fascination is morally juxtaposed to how we want the world to work, given our natural aversion to violence and rudeness. And to question why we love these kinds of films so much that we're prepared to see not only single renditions, but sometimes series of them, go by and by and by without really ever questioning whether or not that makes us bad people. Because maybe it does. Maybe it makes us bad people. My experiences with gangster films, they go back a way. I remember the first kind of introduction to gangster films was really weird for me, because it came at a time when I was still a teenager and living with somebody, we'll leave it at that, who was getting very deeply invested in that style of life. And it wasn't just gangster films, it was hip-hop music, specifically Tupac, Biggie Smalls, 50 Cent, things of that nature. A gangster lifestyle, money, girls, guns, power, even now with gangsters being more, they're more affiliated with rappers, because, gangsta with an A. So talking muscles, shiny rims, big necks, all that other shit. But back when I was a kid, gangster films I wasn't allowed to watch them. One of the few things, in fact, that I wasn't allowed to watch, because of the use of drugs, because of the overt and realistic violence, the relatable way that they can be applied to real life, because a lot of this stuff, even though it's based in fiction, you do see on a sort of fairly regular basis in the real world, only to a minute degree. So films I was exposed to when I was a kid included Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. Not when it came out in the cinema, and not even when it came out on VHS. For you kids out there, there were these little plastic tapes that were probably bigger than this, okay, about wider than this, but not quite as thick, that you'd put into your VHS player before DVDs were about, and it would have a tape inside of it. You'd have to press play, and it would run. And if you wanted to rewind something, you had to wait physically for the tape to rewind. Now, Lock, Stock had been out for a while, and I saw that on DVD for the first time, maybe around 2003. So I'd have been about 13. I was naturally averse to it, I've got to be honest with you. I didn't like, because everything I'd been raised to watch up until that point, they were doing badly. So they were swearing, kick off, there were guns, there was violence, there was a heavy drug culture in the films, and I despise drugs. I mean, just to go on a little tangent here, just so anyone knows about the show or maybe has an aversion to drugs themselves or maybe uses them or whatever, I fucking hate drugs. Fucking hate them. I even hate the movement in America right now to legalize weed, with a lot of the justifications being that, oh, it does more good and personal. I don't give a fuck what excuse you give to me about weed legalization. I don't want to fucking hear it. Unless you look and you see the effects of what weed does to families, friends of people, the lives that people lead who get into smoking weed, I don't want to hear your fucking opinion, because your philosophy of, oh, well, you know, it actually doesn't do as much damage to alcohol. I'm in the camp that alcohol should be fucking recognised. Well, unbanning one thing in lieu of another isn't the fucking answer. It's tighter restrictions on everything, you fucking idiot. Anyway, back to the point at hand, if I've not scared you off by this point. That film wasn't the best induction into gangster films for me, because it was very violent. The humour was in bursts, and you had to get the humour in order to get it. And otherwise, it was a very dark experience for me. I didn't enjoy it the first time I watched it. Later on, though, I was exposed to gangster films yet again in the form of The Godfather. Now, The Godfather is a more traditional film with gangster elements in it and an enhanced sense of violence based on the time period for the 70s. But by the time I saw it, I'd already grown up to maybe 17, 18. I remember distinctly a couple of my friends, we'd ordered KFC, got some beers in, and more to the point, we had an afternoon, we didn't know what to do with ourselves, and someone said, let's watch The Godfather. I had never seen it. Cool, let's watch that then. 3 hours later, from a cinematic point of view, and from an artistic point of view, and from a narrative point of view, I was absolutely blown away. Didn't even matter that it was a gangster film, because in essence, that genre hadn't really come into its own yet, in terms of the violence aspect. Gangster films have existed for 50, 60 years because of, the original Ocean's 11 film with Frank Sinatra, a lot of the old 1950s mafia films, made famous by Hollywood at the time, although very seldom made because the mafia still had a fairly tight grasp on things back in the day. However, that film kind of opened my eyes up to the prospect that maybe gangster films aren't so bad. And then you've got films like The Departed, you've got Goodfellas, you've got Casino, you've got Scarface, you've got Carlito's Way. All of these films have varying degrees of morality, varying degrees of what lines they're willing to cross. All of them, they'll have common denominators which makes them successful. And that's what I want to touch on in this podcast, because like I said, on the face of these films, you should not like them if you're a decent human being, because almost all of them have some kind of unjustifiable motive that's based on some kind of warped code of silence and protecting the family or the business as a whole. All of them usually vary and foray into the drug business. All of them, to a certain degree, have a depiction of violence against women or a demeanment of women, using them as objects or somehow obstacles that the gangsters must overcome yet obtain. And all of them have a very warped morality of how they get their audience from the time that they enter them into this world to the time they leave, to leave the audience feeling like they shouldn't just go out and join a gang the second they leave. So I've got a couple of points here that I'll go through. The first one I want to touch on is the sense of family and belonging. Now, most of these films have some element of this to a degree or another. Now, things like Lock, Stock don't have family, but it is based around four friends who are inexorably joined together in their fate, i.e. that they owe a lot of money to a dude with a mustache and a weird adult toy business, I forget. But they all lean on each other to get them through the day. You've got another film such as Goodfellas, which again is to a degree about friends, but they grow up, they have families, and those families become intertwined with one another. So I get that as well. Godfather is exactly that. It is about family because you're talking about crime families, plural. But it's that sense of that sense of belonging and that validation that family and friends give us, that we all like to see on the screen, because we like to see it reflected in our own lives. So things like always having a inner circle of friends or family that never betrays one another, each affirms the actions of another as, yeah, you have to do what you gotta do, or, you know, whatever. And then they always tend to reprimand individual members of the group rather than, you know, one-on-one, because they just know that powers in numbers, intimidation, or social pressure, or whatever the case may be, helps keep everyone in line and on the same track. Now, again, I think a lot of us have a sense of that yearning in our own lives. Me, I'm kind of a loner in the sense that I do like keeping to myself. I like socialising, just not all the time. And when I got to tap out, I got to tap out. I'm not the sort of person that even gets remotely embarrassed by saying, yeah, I got to go, guys. You know, I'm bored, or I don't like it, I'm not having fun, I'm gonna go. Last time I remember going early and everyone kind of being angry at me to an extent was I was on a trip in Switzerland with my business, and they were all having a meal. I didn't really want to stick around for all that much more, so maybe an hour after I arrived, I went back to my hotel room, cracked out my phones and just watched YouTube and fell asleep. The exciting life I lead. And the next day, while everyone else was pairing up and stuff, I went for a wander, man. I just looked around Geneva, fuck it. I just thought, well, it's an opportunity to sightsee, sample some of my stuff. I didn't naturally see it as an opportunity to socialise, so maybe that's why gangster films have never sat all that well with me, because I don't understand necessarily that need to belong and to have that inner circle to affirm what I do. I just kind of do what I do. I mean, I am, of course, that attitude has, of course, led me to being PWT heavyweight champion, an achievement none of you will ever match and none of you can ever achieve. So be jealous of that fact while you're having your happy Christmas dinners and going out for beers and stuff. Just remember, you will never, ever accomplish anything so as important as this. But back to the point. So there's that element that I think a lot of people gravitate towards in these films. The second point is, in fact, I'll leave that point till last because I think it's the most important one. The second one is the vicarious nature of those watching the films with an innate need or want to see people wield power with little to no consequence, and I'll elaborate on that. A lot of people, I think, in their own lives suffer some kind of, they're very frustrated, they're very constricted in what they can say and what they can do compared to how they really feel. Because they know the consequences of actually speaking up and doing anything about it far outweigh the benefits of actually speaking out and doing anything about it. Now, the reason why, again, I don't necessarily need to see that is because I tend to do that in my own life as it stands at the moment. Again, I am PWT heavyweight champion. Now, I get the gimmick is the gimmick. But how many people would actually do how many people, if they really, really wanted to be a ballet dancer, let's say, just picking an example off the top of my head, would go and do it? Without fear of reprisals of people saying, oh, that's stupid, or oh, that's an absolutely gay idea, or whatever. Not many people. Not many people actually have the brass cojones, because more often than not, people are looking for affirmation in what they choose to do, and oftentimes they have to bear into consideration what other people think before doing it. So men are supposed to take typically manly things and do those, and girls, to a lesser extent these days, granted, have to go and do girly things. Otherwise, that kind of lack of, that deviation from the norm is usually admonished because people don't understand. But we all kind of have something we like to do that no one else really understands. And so as a result, I think that most people like to live vicariously through things. So be it their kids and their accomplishments and abilities, their friends maybe, you know, you hear people name drop a lot, but more often than not it's through fiction, it's through the mediums that they sample. So if it's music, go and see bands and concerts and stuff, and also TV and movies. And gangster films are a unique genre in the fact that they don't really have lines that don't cross. If they need to portray rape, murder, drug use, drug sales, you know, any kind of moral boundary that's enforced upon us as people day to day and that we should rightly be mindful of as we go about our business, is kind of out the window for the sake of narrative. And I think that's a powerful motive for people to enjoy these films. I think a lot of people like watching, even I hate to say this, but even the nature of just killing somebody you don't like. Just that thing of gangsters going, what'd you say to me? What'd you fucking say to me? Tell me the fucking, I'll do it, bang, dead. I just watched some of Legend the other day with Tom Hardy, and they had the same thing. Guy walked in, had a couple of minutes, said something, and one of Tom Hardy's portrayals, I forget which one it is, Reg, I don't know, pulls the trigger, can't kill him, and then proceeds to stab the hell out of this person in front of everybody. Now, hopefully, we're not all that megalomaniacal. If that's not a word, I just made it up, you heard it here first. But the point is, I get angry sometimes, but I tend to find outlets for it, be it raging on here, which I try to avoid, because I like this to be a positive forum, or I go lift something really fucking heavy, and be safe in the knowledge that if anyone does try to test me, at least I've got a reasonable chance of choking them out if I have to. Not great, but a reasonable chance. I mean, being PWT heavyweight champion of the world gives me an advantage over some people. But even then, to an extent, the life they lead is appealing in the fact that power, money, the attraction level of the opposite sex, the ability to be able to ask and do whatever you want is an intoxicating thing. But often these films don't deal with the day-to-day pressures of that, because anyone who works knows that, having a house and having the bills paid and stuff is not that easy. 1 month off, as I've said a million times, 1 month off, that can have knock-on effects to most people. I couldn't take 3 months off with no pay, put it that way. I'd be in debt up to my eyeballs and I'd be starving to death. Whereas in these films, it's a seemingly endless supply of money, a seemingly endless supply of, jobs and opportunities and avenues to explore and widen your peripheral and stuff like that. So again, I can understand why people would gravitate towards that, but they kind of ignore a lot of that the practical nature of being a gangster, which is, even though you've got a lot of money coming, you've got a lot of pressure. They tend to deal with that in segments as well. So a lot of films, they'll have the introduction of the characters, establish their backstories and establish why you should like them or hate them or fear them. They come into it and then they prove it to the audience, and then that's when it all falls down. So then the character will go through some sort of personal issue, they'll start to question whether or not it's what they want, and then the police will invariably come in as some kind of overarching boogeyman that, for me at least, I sit there as a watcher or a viewer, and I wonder what the fuck the police were doing the whole time. If everyone knows this, and it's like, oh yeah, let everybody know that we weren't to be fucked with. It's like, okay, what are the police doing all the time? Not only does it make them look inept, it makes them look even worse because they're the ones spoiling all the fun for the audience, who by this point have become invested in the characters. So the police never come off looking that good in these films, which again probably has, it's either an effect or it's a symptom of the way we naturally treat police these days, which I'll come to on a podcast at some point, because I want to talk about police and the nature of policing, because it's an interesting subject that I have kind of diverse opinions on, because I have a checkered history, to say the least, with regards to my perception of the police and their position and the way they should be carrying themselves in society. But back to the concept that I'm trying to put across to you guys, which is, you're terrible people for liking these films. Terrible, so am I. So that's one point. And then we've got the two most important points that I think are worth touching on. The affirmation that you're free to enjoy these stories because the bad guys always got their comeuppance. How many gangster films have you ever seen where, let's call them the heroes for a second. So I'll take some examples. So in Snatch, it's the four friends. In Snatch, it's Tommy and Turkish. In Lock, Stock, it's the four friends. In Goodfellas, it's Henry Hill. In The Godfather, it's to an extent Al Pacino, but more to the point Marlon Brando. And in Casino, it's Robert De Niro's character. Now, those guys are not classified as the bad guys, even though, if you break it down, they are very, very, very bad people. You wouldn't invite those people round to your Christmas dinner if you had to, because they were terrible, terrible people who killed and murdered and tortured and all the rest of it. However, The film sets to set them apart in terms of bands of, right, these are bad guys, but they're actually okay. They're just bad guys because they're in the life. These guys are the guys you need to be worried about, and these guys are the ones that make everyone else afraid. So, in every single gangster film, to a certain extent, the bad guy gets his comeuppance, which leaves the audience feeling, okay, fair enough. Morally, at least, I'm free to enjoy this now, because I know that anyone that did something bad has had some kind of consequence or penalty leveled towards them. But it's always in one chunk at the end of the films. Always. The only exception I can think to this really is The Godfather, because Al Pacino's character in that film is just, he is a legit bad guy. He's had 7 or 8 people murdered at least at the end of the film, and used christening, there it is, the christening of his sister's baby as a cover for him not being the one who murdered everybody, which is a pretty fucking reprehensible thing to do, if you ask me. So there's that. But everyone else, more often than not, tends to get their comeuppance. And I think that has a bearing, because I think if we had to watch films, as benign as it sounds, we like to think that life works with some kind of morality or karma to it. If it doesn't, then, you know, what is the point of our moral codes? What is the point of us following any kind of thing like that? So I think that there's that, and I think that it's a fallacy because of my last point, which is the lack of context of the people who these stories are based on. And I have one idea in particular, because this is what sparked this podcast, I'll be perfectly honest. Watching a lot of these clips, trying to come up with ideas, and then I came across a documentary on YouTube called The Real Goodfella, which is covering the real life Henry Hill, who The Goodfellas was based predominantly around the testimony of. Now, Henry Hill, in the films, or rather the film, I should say, because there's only one, on screen is an impressionable, clever yet gluttonous individual. But watching the documentary, okay, and actually the reason why I was prompted to watch the documentary in the first place is because I heard some DVD commentary with the real Henry Hill over some of the scenes in the film, where he's reliving the supposedly real life events that have been categorized on the film. And I really struggled for a second because I thought it sounded like Robert De Niro. More to the point, Robert De Niro in character, because he was effing and jeffing every 2 seconds and laughing at everything he was reminiscing on. Specifically, the murder of Spider in the film, i.e. kid talks back to Joe Pesci's character and then gets shot, killed, and then buried like it's absolutely nothing. And the guy's laughing as he's talking about this. And then when you watch the documentary, it's the creepiest thing. He's telling these stories and he knows it's reprehensible, he knows he's bad, but the smile on this creepy motherfucker's face as he's telling you the stories about, yeah, they got whacked. And you know, what are you gonna do? You know, the guy talked back and he got fucking whacked. And then, for a split second, you see the wheels turning in his head and he drops the smile and looks away as if to go, oh wait, I wasn't meant to be laughing at that. That's awkward. Now, I guarantee behind every single one of these films, that lack of clarity in the real life people and how reprehensible these bastards are doesn't really shine through. Now, I get why that is, because in order to make these films in the first place, you have to have a protagonist, someone that we can all rally behind. If they're just a sea of faceless individuals woven together in a tapestry, then we can't really root for anybody. Batman The Dark Knight is a classic example of this, because actually that is not a story about Batman. It is not a story about the Joker. It's not a story about Alfred, about I forget her name now, the female lead, Rachel Dawes, there it is. Not about Two-Face. It's about the unraveling of the mob to the rise of the Joker. And that's a wide tapestry of things, and it doesn't really fixate on one person. However, because the audience knows it's a Batman film, we have that point to focus on. He's the moral arbiter. He's there to reflect back on us what we want to see in ourselves. And in gangster films, where you don't have a police officer that's in there, with the notable exception of The Departed with Leonardo DiCaprio's character, you don't have a moral barometer to reflect back on you. So what do? You set the barrier lower for one of the worst characters, make him somehow seem in context a better gangster than the others, and there you got yourselves a you got yourself a nice protagonist. It'd be a shame if something would have happened to it. You know what I mean? So, as I realised this, I was watching these films again. I watched The Godfather a few days ago because I did a review on it recently and I love that film so much. Watched Goodfellas again. Casino again. I've got to be honest, full disclosure, I've never seen Scarface through all the way. I've seen all the most important bits. I've seen Al Pacino's portrayal, which, to be honest, I'm not very impressed with. I might get some heat for that. I really didn't, I think, and it might have something to do with the fact that I'm a big wrestling fan and Razor Ramon might have killed that gimmick for me. It looks ridiculous. It looks like he's emulating Razor Ramon rather than the other way around, which is what I know happened. But all of these films have these common denominators which allow their audiences to watch and laugh. And I wonder why they've kind of gone away a little bit, because The Departed is probably the most recent one. Guy Ritchie, who used to be the king of these kinds of British style films, has gone into making King Arthur and is pretty soon remaking Aladdin. I wonder if you put the cast of Lock, Stock into the Aladdin thing, you got yourself a film I'm going to go watch, because that's going to be interesting as fuck. But you've got to think that maybe society has taken that and run with it a little bit, and I'll explain what I mean by that. A lot of these undertones and these undercurrents of these films are now being lived out by a lot of people. Social media has allowed people to kind of flaunt their lives in a way that no one ever really had before. If you were in these films, it's actually a pretty big point of contention with a lot of the characters when they become rich. You know, they get their families around, they get their friends around and show off what they've got. It's a big thing to show success. Social media kind of allows you to do that every single day. I'm doing it right now. You see in my office, you see in my little setup and stuff. It's not to show success, it's literally because this is where I film. But if I was so inclined, oh, actually no, there is something I want to brag about. My PWT Heavyweight Championship of the World title belt. I promise that's the last time I'm plugging it. But you could just as easily do this. I've seen millions of YouTube posts where some pretty fucking chick with no fucking personality, talent, or narrative that's worth giving to the world because she adds nothing to it other than this is how you put your fucking making. Oh, it does my nut. And then, oh no, and the worst ones are the guys. The worst ones are the guys that constantly go out of the way to try and do cool shit like it's their actual life, when their life is just as boring and mundane as the rest of us. God damn. But nevertheless, these films, I think, have given license to people to live vicariously through that and take it to the next level by trying even to approach life in these ways. So rudeness is a really big problem these days in terms of how I approach things. I like to approach people with respect, try to say please and thank you and open doors and stuff. The amount of times that's thrown in my face and seen as weakness rather than and then people are surprised. Because for people who don't know me, who watch this podcast or watch my show, I do have a temper, okay? I have a bad temper because of my daddy. My daddy never took no shit from nobody. And it's apparent in his tone and in the way he carries himself. And unfortunately, some of that rubs off on his kids, mainly me and my brother. We are two people who don't mind getting in people's faces. Now that is something I try to suppress because I don't think you should carry yourself that way. However, you get so many people these days that think they can speak to people however they want, and I get that you should be free to speak your mind. But there are times and places to exercise that. And I think mediums such as gangster films, to a lesser extent, a lot of these things on social media, these memes and this idea that everyone's free to speak their mind, I get that and that's fine. Also, the inherently violent nature of these films versus the inherently violent nature of a lot of the stuff we're watching, the over-sexualization of stuff these days, the amount of music videos where sex is not even subtly suggested. It's there. I mean, goddamn, I was sitting at work the other day and I happened to make a joke about somebody and they looked at me like I was insane. The middle finger emoji. When did that become a standard thing on phones? I know that makes me seem sheltered as hell, but and these phones are given to kids. I know you're not supposed to give phones to kids, but a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid who's still learning morality, still learning how to carry himself in the world, has got a middle finger emoji on his phone. Now, granted, it's nice that you can tone the colour of the skin, because we are all equal after all. We're not all white, so we don't always have to have a white middle finger emoji. But goddamn, did no one question why we're putting that emoji there in the first place? Just because everyone's using it? Well, maybe we need to question why everyone's using it in the first place. God damn! And I'm not holding these films to account, but what I am saying is that the mediums that we're consuming and the way that they validate behaviour that we then carry on into our personal lives, that then validates how other people behave and encourages other people to behave in the same way, is a very concerning thing. Now, I think that speaks volumes to me, because out of every gangster film I've ever seen, the one I will watch over and over and over and over and over again is The Godfather. Why? Because that film, if no other film, illustrates the fallacy of gangster life and this idea you can live guilt-free, consequence-free while pursuing your own wants and needs, that no matter the cost to any other individual, ends up leading to the demise and decline of every single person that takes it on. Every single person, without fail, they either get murdered or they get abandoned or whatever the case may be. Okay, no one ever walks away happy. Only through hard work, cooperation, perseverance and politeness are we going to grow as individuals collectively. Otherwise, we're going to be a collection of individuals, and there's nothing wrong with that, so long as you come back to the point, which is that we all rely on each other, and no amount of YouTube flaunting or I'm an old woman, I got my money, or man, I'm such a big dog, oh man, I got so much money, I got bitches knocking on my door 24/7. Bullshit. There will come a day where that doesn't happen anymore. I don't care how butch you are, I don't care how rich you are, there will come a day where you will need to rely on the kindness of others. And films like these don't do much to encourage people to do that. So, in summary of this, gangster films and their popularity, I think the reason why they've kind of declined in sort of frequency and popularity over the last sort of 10 years is because people don't really need to see that on TV and media anymore because they're already living it. And I think that's a sad thing, because I think living vicariously through these films is one thing, taking their message and running with it is another. You see that every day with people and their approach to money and their approach to long-term life, and it worries me. So, at the conclusion of this podcast, I would like to leave you with this, because I like to leave messages at the end of my podcast. I like them to have some kind of point. If you watch media and consume it, please don't be impressionable enough to think that they give you license to do whatever you want to do. You need to look at them for what they are, and it's entertainment. It's giving you a window or an idea into a world that you do not live in, okay? It's the same with music videos, it's the same with everything else. I see it on YouTube, and I'll reference it again, POF, Plenty of Fish, dating website. I occasionally dabble and go back on there because I'm going to try and reconnect with the world somehow, I guess. Point is that there's not a girl on there these days who isn't a caricature of girls who we used to make fun of 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when I was sort of still coming into learning how girls worked and that they weren't going to shatter into 1,000 pieces if I touched one because I was so scared of what they might say back. Girls like that weren't the norm. Girls of substance, girls who were humble, who were shy, were the norm, and quite frankly we're all better for it, because it meant that they were harder to pursue, and when you finally came across a good girl, she was a good girl. These days, they're much more rare, much more rare. Girls are more aware than ever of how desirable they are, yet they still feel the need to embellish and put makeup and all this other business when they're beautiful just the way they are, and their personality and the content of their character will make them more attractive than any other aspect that they could ever add to themselves. Kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent here, but it all leads back to my point, which is that not necessarily just gangster films, but they're the easiest thing to break down a bad thing. So, what I will leave this podcast on is this, because I've just seen my recording thing, even though I've set it to record to my damn ST device, this phone, man. I've got to get a proper video camera, people. I'm going to have to upgrade at some point. I'm going to do this legit, or I'm going to need to get a couple and dot them about. If anyone hasn't watched the Joe Rogan Experience, JRE, on YouTube, or on, I think he's on podcast one. I'm not 100%. I've never listened to them on podcast when I've ever watched their YouTube videos. It's a fascinating setup. Does 2 to 3 hours worth of podcasting, and that sounds like a lot, but honestly it isn't. It's great conversation. You tend to learn a lot, even though I take a little bit of issue with some of what Joe Rogan says and does, how he carries himself. I think he's a bit of a hypocrite sometimes. But then, aren't we all? Is this. Try not to let these things influence you. Try to look at yourself, what makes you happy, and stop looking at other people, and more in particular in media, what everyone else is doing and what they think they should be doing, and letting that influence you. Maybe, I don't say not go and influence you to some degree, because that's impossible. Things leave impressions, I get that. But especially with things like like I say, gangster films where they basically tell you to go out and as long as you've got the strength of will and the fuck you attitude, you can take and do whatever you want. Sure, that works to a certain degree, but take it from me, an individual that isn't afraid to tell people to go fuck themselves, doesn't always have a happy ending. Sometimes you wish you hadn't, wish you bought your tongue and just thought of a cleverer way of approaching things. So thank you very much for watching this episode of the Halcyon Podcast. Please like, share, subscribe. I've just realised, by the way, that the light from the window behind has meant that I'm somewhat of a ghostly figure, and I've been playing FIFA. I'm trying to catch up on my game. It's supposed to be my day off, and I'm making content for you people. That's how dedicated I am, but I'm deciding I'm kicking back a little bit. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for anyone that's watched the last podcast. I know it was super long, so I've kept this one relatively short. In the meantime, stay tuned. I think the next review that's dropping is picked by my good friend Hollywood, Ryan Culverhouse. It's probably going to be The Walking Dead. So yeah, look forward to that. Thanks very much for watching again. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next episode of the Halcyon Podcast.
It's a good time.